All right, we are going to try this again. Rap 43, welcome back. All right, we're live again. Thank you for sticking with me with the technical difficulties. Just got a new iPhone. My iPhone 6 is dying, and I got my internet connection finally reestablished. So we are live again. So my name is Joe. I'm the physics program chair at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. I'll give a few seconds for people to pop in and join the scope. As they do, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the physics program chair at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. I'm also a best-selling author of Accelerated Learning Techniques for Students and a speaker and trainer who trains students and teachers about how to learn and or teach more effectively. Today, what we're talking about is Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. Brain rules that students and teachers should know in order to learn and or teach more effectively. Today is day 4, part 4 of a 4-part series, and I've gone through the first 9 brain rules, but let me touch on them again. So brain rule number 1 is exercise boosts brain power. Exercise boosts brain power. So for students, you want to think about getting 30 minutes of aerobic exercise at least 2 to 3 times a week. Another thing I mentioned is think about getting some aerobic exercise before a big quiz. Show electricity problems was the cause of your slow electricity problems. Yes, I'm thwarted by the laws of physics every single day. Brain rule number 1, exercise boosts brain power. So what we now know is that aerobic exercise not only improves the body, it improves the mind. It helps in almost every way that we can test cognitive abilities. So exercising aerobically 2 to 3 times a week can have tremendous mental benefits. Yes, it releases endorphins, those happy drugs that make us feel so pleasurable. And think about getting some aerobic exercise immediately before you have to have a huge mental outpouring of mental energy. So before a big quiz or exam or final exam, think about moving. As a teacher, think about getting your students actively involved, getting them moving. I try and think about getting my students moving every 15 or 20 minutes if possible. If at any point you have questions, type them in and I'll be happy to pause and answer them. Okay, brain rule number 2. The human mind evolved to, the human brain evolved to. What I talked about here, what about yoga? Yoga is awesome. I don't know about the specific mental benefits of yoga, but I know that it has tremendous spiritual and physical benefits. So the human brain evolved to, what I talk about is that we have 3 brains in one, 3 brains that have evolved over time. We started with a lizard brain, then we had a mammal brain, and finally the human brain. And what I talked about here is the fact that anytime our lizard brain takes over, which happens whenever we have fear, anxiety, stress, or threat, our prefrontal cortex literally shuts down. Learning is nearly impossible in a state where you're feeling this freeze, fight, or flight response. So what this means as a student is being very aware of your mental, emotional, and physical states. Do not sit down to do work when you're feeling stressed or anxious. Your time is better well spent relaxing, getting in the optimal mental, emotional, and physical states. And in a future scope, I'll teach you a process called the alpha state process, designed to help make sure you're in the optimal alpha brainwave state. So as a teacher, what I talked about is deliberately, let me get to that question, deliberately, is there a massage that could help enhance I don't know of any specific massages that'll help increase blood flow, but aerobic exercise definitely increases blood flow. So brain rule number 2, the human brain evolved to. As a teacher, think about deliberately creating an environment where your students feel safe and they want to be there. I call it, excuse me, deliberately creating home court advantage. And I'll do a longer scope on this, but some of the things I do, I use music a lot in my classroom. Music as soon as students are coming in, music anytime they have some kind of pair share or interactive activity, low music when they are working on a problem. I love the use of music. I grade in green ink always. I never grade in red ink. I teach college physics and I still give my students stickers when they do well in a quiz or celebration. And let me tell you, college students love stickers. Everybody loves stickers. Start giving stickers in your classrooms. And on celebrations, I give scratch and sniff stickers, although I have to say the new scratch and sniff stickers do not really smell. I'm kind of disappointed. I also have a little "that was easy" button.
That was easy.
Anytime my student asks a great question or we do a example problem that was a bit challenging and students are getting it,
that was easy.
I also use a lot of props in my classroom. I use magic, things like that. I want students to really want to come to my class and be excited to be there. Okay, rule number 3, every brain is wired differently. No two people learn exactly the same way. Everybody's brain is slightly different. So as a student, what does this mean to you? Nobody can teach you how to learn best except for you. You have to experiment with different learning styles, different learning strategies. Figure out how much or how you learn best. Think about how much time you've spent in classes learning various subjects. It's been thousands of hours if you've gone to college. Think about how much time you have spent learning how you learn best. For most people, it's not many. I'm auditory and visual. I'm mostly visual and kinesthetic, and we'll talk a little bit about that soon. So as a teacher, what does this mean? The knowledge that every brain is wired differently and that no two people think the same way. What you want to do is teach things multiple ways. I always try to present the same material at a slightly different angle, and I present it 3 or 4 or 5 times over the course of a week, always trying to present it slightly differently so that different types of learners may get it. Excuse me, it's really hot in here. It's been a long day, and I'm excited to have my internet back and a new iPhone that's hopefully working out. My throat is very dry. Excuse me. Rule number 4, people don't pay attention to boring things. A few really good things in this chapter. 1, he talked about multitasking. There is no such thing as multitasking when it comes to learning information. The brain can only focus on one thing at a time. What it does is it rapidly shifts focus from one thing to another, to another, to another. And every time you shift focus, you lose a little bit of productivity. And in fact, when you're multitasking, you're about half as productive as you usually are, and you make about 50% more errors than if you're focusing on one thing. As a teacher, I do not allow cell phones in my class. This is something I just decided to pick my battle, and actually that was the battle I decided I wanted to fight, because students, I noticed, were texting all the time. It was driving me crazy, and they cannot pay attention and text at the same time. As soon as they check their texts, they are off thinking about that. It's going to take them time to get back. So teachers, really think about getting rid of cell phones. Don't let them use them in your class. As a student, put the cell phone away. A couple other things from this is 10-minute rule. People can, I agree with you, so annoying it distracts other students too. And let me tell you, now I'm hyper aware of it. When I walk by other teachers' classrooms, I kind of peek inside, and you'd be amazed at how many students are texting or checking their email. It's crazy. That's what makes periscoping hard for me. Yes. Okay, as a teacher, think about the 10-minute rule. You only have about 10 minutes to maintain your students' attention before it starts to wander. So what John Medina recommends in his book is giving some kind of hook every 10 minutes that captures the audience's attention and makes sure they're with you. So for me, I use a lot of different techniques. I may actually just have them stand up. I may show a powerful video, really amazing physics demos. Sometimes I'll even throw in a magic trick. Do I have one here to show you? I thought I had one. Oh, I have a quick one. Okay. This is one I'm not going to teach. I'm just going to show you the beginning of it. So I've got a pen here. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the tip of the pen. Which way is the point pointing? In this case, right now, it's pointing straight up. Now it's pointing straight down, pointing straight up, pointing straight down, and now it's pointless, unless you know where to look. Anyway, that magic trick is called pointless. I'll show it to you again in more detail. There's like 5 phases. It's an awesome trick. So we were talking about people don't pay attention to boring things. Emotions are like post-it notes that tell our brain to pay attention. Anytime you can get your students emotionally involved, it's going to be more memorable. As a student, think about attaching positive emotions to learning. The more emotional The more positive emotions, the more happy, joyful emotions you can attach to learning. Oh yes, storytelling is such a powerful way of capturing students' attention. I like to tell personal stories, and actually as a teacher, what I want to do is throw in more stories about the scientists and the people that they're learning about. However, I have a ton of material to cover, and that's not always possible. Rule number 5 and 6 are the same. Repeat to remember. I'm just starting to teach about makeup on my scope. Congratulations, Cheryl. Rule 5, repeat to remember. First one is on short-term memory. One of the big things from this chapter is spaced learning, what I've called spaced repetition in previous scopes. What this means is if you're going to take something from short-term to long-term memory, you can't do that overnight. You have to expose yourself repeatedly, but at well-spaced intervals. I tell my students that it's much better to study for 4 30-minute study sessions than four 30-minute study sessions separated in time than one 3-hour study session. Cramming doesn't work long term. What you want to do is study a little bit every night, and when you do that, you're refiring the neural connections that got created when you were learning that material, and every time we refire those same neurons, it makes the learning deeper. Another thing about this, which is kind of cool, muscle memory. Yes, in fact, muscle memory is just neuron memory. Anytime you move something, it's just specific neurons firing. Muscle memory is just really when you've created a neural network, fired electricity over that network so many times that it's really well established. Another cool thing from this is space-dependent learning. Research is showing that if you recreate the environment in which you first learned something, then that memory is easier to access. Times table theory, not sure about that. Let me touch on this. One thing that students can do is think about maybe even incorporating smell into your studying. So one thing I used to do is let's say anytime you're studying physics, you smell a lemon. So at home you're working on physics problems, you got a lemon, you smell it. You do this every single time you study physics, and then when it comes time to take the quiz or celebration, aka exam, you bring a lemon with you, you smell it, and that smell of the lemon can actually start to aid in retrieving those specific memories that were stored as you were smelling the lemon. We only learned up to 12 times 12 in school, hence the auto memory of 12 times 12. Ah, yes. We built those memory tables, or those multiplication tables, through rote memory, and over time, really well stored. A couple other things. One, the first few minutes, Sorry about the bumbling. I'm trying to do this off the cuff slightly with just some index cards. So I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, something that determines whether or not you're going to remember a specific piece of information, often it's the first few seconds of when that memory is initially encoded. So the very beginning of class is hugely important, and one of the things I'm doing now is I use the very first day of the semester. I don't cover any content. All I'm thinking about is getting the students excited for the class. So I start off the very first day with a really awesome, amazing mentalism trick that I might show at some point. It really captures their attention, and then I show them a couple really awesome physics demos, talk about why physics is amazing. I get them excited. First impressions count for learning, and you want that very first impression students have of you and your class to be super duper memorable. Okay, rule number 6, repeat to remember. Now we're talking about long-term memory. A couple things from this chapter he talked about is the whole process of consolidation. How does short-term memories get consolidated into long-term memories? Really fascinating is that it takes years. It's this back and forth sort of conversation between your sensory cortices and your hippocampus. And a memory doesn't really become sort of set in stone for many, many, many years. And every time you remember something, you're actually consolidating it all over again. It's like you're remembering it for the first time, and what ends up happening is present experiences can start to bleed into past memories, and our memories can change. Memories are pliable. So as a student, you need to be really careful about how you study, how you learn stuff, and one of the things I teach my students is practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And as you're practicing certain techniques, like let's say problem-solving techniques, you want to be careful how you practice them because that can actually change your memory of how to do a problem. As a teacher, I'm always thinking about trying to guide my students in how they're reviewing for my quizzes, my celebrations, things like that. Practice makes permanent. It's only perfect practice that makes perfect. Okay, another interesting thing is, well, I wanted to share with you a really good cycle for reviewing is called 10-24-7. So you can almost imagine you have a little padlock. You're turning it 10 to the right, 24 to the left, and 7 to the right. That's how you unlock long-term memory. What does it stand for? 10 minutes, 24 hours, 7 days. So ideally, right after you learn something, you want to re-expose yourself to it 10 minutes afterwards. It's going to refire those neural connections that got established, making it stronger. Then 24, you want to do it again 24 hours later, and then 7 days means you want to do it multiple times over the course of 7 days. Now, how many times is going to depend upon how difficult the subject matter is. Ideally, it would be every day. But 10-24-7 is a good review cycle. Review 10 minutes after you learn something, and then again 24 hours later, and then again multiple times within 7 days. Let me do a quick little recap. We are talking about Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina, and I'm talking about how students and educators can use those brain rules to learn and teach more effectively. We've covered the first 6, we'll review the first 6. I went through them in more detail before. Rule number 7, sleep well, think well. There's tremendous evidence now about how important sleep is to every aspect of learning. Pretty much any kind of cognitive test you can give, if you haven't had enough sleep, your performance on that test is going to go down dramatically. I need a nap right now. Yes, it's about that time for a nap. One of the things he talks about is it's almost universal, our desire to take a nap in the afternoon between 2 and 3 o'clock. So one of the things you need to be careful of as a teacher is if you're teaching afternoon classes, especially a class right after lunch, you have to be especially engaging because the blood is rushing down to the stomach to process the food. We have that natural tendency for a nap. And there's a great quote I want to read by Dr. John Medina that pretty much sums up this chapter. The bottom line is that sleep loss means mind loss. Sleep cripples thinking in just about every way you can measure thinking. Sleep loss hurts attention, executive function, working memory, mood, quantitative skills, logical reasoning ability, and general math knowledge. All of those things I'm pretty sure are important for students. So students, get a good night's sleep, especially before a quiz or exam. Can't wait to take your physics class. Oh, I would love to have you in my class. In fact, are you a student at Cabrillo? If so, definitely take my class. It's going to be a lot of fun. Another interesting thing, NASA did a study. Yes, oh, tell me your name at some point. 26-minute nap. NASA astronauts showed a performance of 34% better. So, another big thing is memories are stored while we sleep. So what you're doing during the day is you're just taking in all of this plethora of information. But if you don't sleep, that memory is never going to get transferred from short-term to long-term memory. I get groggy after 30 minutes. So a really great cycle, I talked about this before, it's called the, the Pomodoro technique. It's to study for 25 minutes at a time in short bursts of focused attention where you get rid of all external distractions, no Facebook, no email, no texting, and all you do is focus intently. Sergio, welcome Sergio. Focus intently for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break, then focus intently for another 25 minutes and then take a longer 10 or 15-minute break. So if you do that, you're getting 50 solid focused minutes of studying in a little bit more than an hour, and you'll be amazed at how productive you can be when you get rid of all external distractions. Okay, and then as a teacher, think about you yourself need a good night's sleep. I can tell you that when I've taught after not getting enough sleep, I'm never as engaging, I'm never as on as when I've gotten a full night's sleep. Okay, Brain rule number 8 is stressed brains do not think the same as non-stressed brains. Chronic stress is a killer to the brain. It's a killer to the immune system. In fact, what is it? The number one predictor of success for middle school students is, emotional stability in the home. If a student comes from an emotionally stable home, they are so much more likely to be successful than a student from a non-emotionally stable home. And that's because chronic stress affects brain development, and the more stressed we are, the less we can think clearly. And the absolute worst kind of stress is the feeling of helplessness, the feeling that you have no control over your external circumstances. Okay, rule number 9, brain rule number 9 is, what is brain rule number 9? Stimulate more of the senses at the same time. So we have 5 senses, obviously, but we have 3 main senses when it comes to learning. Those are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And what we now know is that these 3, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, are stored in different parts of the brain. So visual memories, everything you take in through your eyes, they're stored in your visual cortex, which is located in the back of your head. If you put your hand on the back of your hand is about half of an inch to an inch above your visual cortex, which is allowing you to watch this scope. Everything that we hear, all of our auditory information, is stored in our temporal lobes or our auditory cortex, and then everything that we do with our bodies, our kinesthetic movement, that's stored in our somatosensory cortex. What this means as a student is that if you only learn something one way, it's only being stored in one location in your brain. If you learn something using multiple modalities, using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, then the memories are going to be stored in different parts of the brain, and then when you go to recall them, it's going to be that much easier for you to recall. Yes, thumbs up, thank you. Now let me give teachers a few teaching strategies that take into account visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And let me say I've done a longer scope on this called Make Your Message Memorable, and it's on my YouTube channel. Just search for Joe McCullough. Some visual strategies. 1, color code your content. Use lots and lots of color. I love to use color, and think about using flip charts. Great thing about flip chart is when you're done with the flip chart, you can hang it on the wall, and then you can refer to it for the rest of the semester or the rest of the year. And when I give trainings, I like to use flip charts, and then when I'm done, I hang the flip charts around the room as a review. I have participants stand up, get in groups of 3 or 4, and walk around to the various flip charts, and they spend about 90 seconds or 2 minutes reviewing what they remember from the flip chart. It's called a gallery walk. It's a great little review. It gets people moving. It gets people interacting. Awesome. Use pictures and diagrams in slides. If you're showing PowerPoint slides, you want your text to be a minimum. Visual memory, we'll go through this soon, is by far the strongest memory. People do not like to see lots of slides, and people don't like to see lots of text, and most PowerPoint slides have way too much text in them. A couple other things. You can sorry about that. I got a phone call that I had to decline. So I was talking about, think about you can anchor specific content to a specific location in the classroom. Also, show videos, lots and lots of videos, especially to this generation. We are so video focused with YouTube and on-demand everything. And then think about using visual language. Imagine this, picture this. Can you see it? Okay, some auditory strategies. Use music. I've talked about this before, but music rocks, literally. I use upbeat rock and roll music as soon as students are coming into the classroom. I use upbeat non-instrumental music whenever I have them interacting or doing a pair share. I have songs that are specific for different things, like I have a homework collection song. As soon as I turn the song on, they have until the song finishes. After that, anything turned in is considered late. Use callbacks, simultaneously responses where students are repeating things after you. Again, these are auditory strategies. Use vocal variations. Sometimes you might speak very loudly, or you could quiet down. You can change from high tone to low tone, or you can use one of the most effective techniques, and that is purposeful pauses. I love using purposeful pauses. I've been experimenting with it. As soon as you sort of are talking and talking and talking, and suddenly there's this silence, people just start to turn and look at you. Try not to use in. I'll have to wait for you to finish that thought. Yes. Purposeful pauses. You can anchor content to specific voices or sounds. Have students create a song or chant to memorize the material. Think about how many songs you know by heart. Chances are it's hundreds to thousands. Think about how many of those songs you actually used the lyrics, looked at them to memorize it, and put conscious effort into it. Chances are not many. Something about music just makes it stick in our brains, and if you can attach your content to a song or jingle, it's awesome. And also allow time for auditory processing. One of the things I'm trying to work on as a student, your 2-year-old was typing, no worries. One of the things I'm working on as a teacher is making sure I give my students time to process what I say. One of the things we get into the habit as teachers is constantly talking, as I'm doing now, because I have a lot of content I want to cover. But you need to give your students time to process what you just said. And that may mean just standing there for 15, 20 seconds and allowing students to think about, process what you just said. Okay, some kinesthetic teaching strategies. Provide opportunities to learn by doing. Anytime you can get the students actively involved in learning by actually doing, awesome. Talk slowly. Again, this is not something I do a lot, especially on my periscopes, but kinesthetic learners tend to need more time to process. Think about talking slowly. Hey there, Disney nerd. Create activities that involve role-playing. Provide opportunities for movement. A great thing that I've been doing is now, whenever I have my students, well, not now, this is what I'm going to start doing. Whenever I have my students interacting, I'm going to have them standing up. At least twice a class where they're just getting up off their butts, standing up, and possibly even moving around the room while they're reviewing material. Like, do standing pair shares and reviews. I often ask students to just sit up and adjust their physiology if I notice their state is waning. Okay, so that was the first 9. Again, talking about brain rules by Dr. John Medina. Since spaced repetition and frequent exposures is good, let me just quickly touch on those brain rules. Brain rule number 1, exercise boosts brain power. Rule number 2, the human brain evolved to. Rule number 3, every brain is wired differently. Hey, my last name. Rule number 4, people don't pay attention to boys. Rule number 5, repeat to remember. This one's all about short term. You guys like that? Rule number 6, repeat to remember again. Now we're going on to pink. Rule number 7, sleep well, think well. You need to get a good night's sleep. Rule number 8, stressed brains do not think the same as non-stressed brains. And rule number 9, stimulate more of the senses at the same time. Think about always incorporating visual, auditory, and kinesthetic teaching strategies anytime you teach. And for students, think about incorporating different VAK learning styles. I'll do a whole scope just for students. If you go to my blog at joemccullough.com, I have a couple blog posts on VAK learning styles and VAK learning strategies. Always do the name, shake the person's hand, and repeat the name when they tell me. Yes, and for teachers, I did a pretty long scope on exactly how I memorized all 100 plus of my students' names in a weekend while I was at Las Vegas. There's some really cool memory strategies, but a great source is Quizlet. Check that out. It's called 3 Memory Rules, How to Remember Your Students' Names. Okay, rule number 10, vision trumps our other senses. By far, our visual memory is our strongest memory. In fact, about 50% of our brain's resources are spent processing, storing, and analyzing visual data. I keep pointing up here. This is our prefrontal cortex. Our visual cortex is in the back. Here's a little interesting fact. If you hear information, so let's say you're presented information just through speaking, 3 days later you'll only remember about 10% of it. Add a diagram to it, a picture, 3 days later you'll remember 65%. you're about 6 times more likely to remember information that's presented visually and auditorily than just presented auditorily. Also, reading is very inefficient when it comes to learning, because what the brain has to do is read a word. It has to recognize each letter, which is then processed in different places of the brain, and then, well, not each letter, but you have to first recognize each letter, form it into a word, and then think about that word. Images are much more powerful. And so for students, what do you want to think about? Think about really focusing on the diagrams, graphs, pictures in your textbook. I know a lot of students sort of skip over the pictures, but we are visual learners. Think about using the pictures and diagrams as a study tool. Don't just skip over them. As teachers, use lots and lots of visuals. Notice I took the time to write out all these brain rules. I tried to use multiple colors, different color index cards. Much better than me just going on and say, okay, rule number 10 is vision trumps all senses. Try and use some visuals. All right, rule number 11 is male and female brains are different. Now, this had an interesting discussion about male and female brains, but there's not a lot from this that I would use for teaching or recommend for students. One of the things I thought it was cool is that men and women respond to stress differently. Men, their right amygdala gets fired and they remember the gist of something. For women, their left amygdala gets fired and they remember the details. So it's really important for men and women to work together, because each one brings a slightly different set of skills, slightly different set of thinking to whatever project you're working on. And then last but not least, we are powerful explorers. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and it's been so fun watching her learn. Babies are the very model of how we learn. We learn through exploration and testing our hypotheses and trying things and learning by doing. They just naturally apply the scientific method, right? They make an observation, they have a hypothesis, they do an experiment, and then they come up with a conclusion. Now, somewhere along the line, we became very passive learners in terms of just sit back and listen to the teacher talk for an hour, for 90 minutes, and just absorb the information, and magically it's going to stick. What you need to do is explore the material on your own. We are not passive learners. So for me as a physics teacher, we're trying to redesign our labs so they're more exploratorium type labs, less, okay, do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, and then test whether or not this is right. I need to bother to hear this because the hands a kid an iPad. Need to brother. Oh, I didn't quite get that. But we learn by exploring. So as a teacher, try and have students learn the material on their own. Set it up so they can explore the subject on their own and really start to form their own conclusions, and then you can discuss all that afterwards. So in physics, we're trying to redesign the labs so they're more hands-on exploratory labs where I don't necessarily give them everything they need to know. They have to tinker and discover it on their own. As a student, really think about exploring the material on your own. Don't just accept everything you're told. Try it out yourself, explore it, see how it fits into your own life. All right, well, what I just did was Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. Awesome book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And check out brainrules.net. It's sort of a companion website. He's got lots of awesome videos. Well, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Dr. Joe McCullough. I'm the Physics Program Chair at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. And this is day 45. Intense, you rarely blink. You know, somebody else gave me that comment. I will have to start blinking more. That's the second time. So I don't know what it is. Yes, I'm still getting used to talking to the camera. There, I blinked, and I blinked, and I blinked. Okay, so this is day 45 of a one-year challenge I gave to myself to get on Periscope every single day and share daily doses of dopamine through, what is that? Need to have my brother watch your vids because he's not Explorer. Oh yes, definitely please have them watch it. I archive all of these videos on YouTube, and I post a lot of them to my website, joemccullough.com, along with a weekly blog. So anyway, I'm on Periscope every day, sharing daily doses of dopamine through education, entertainment, and inspiration. Today was about education. Tomorrow, what am I doing? Tomorrow I'm hanging out with my daughter. We're going to go hopefully see some whales and seals and things like that. I'll bring this along and maybe we'll do a scope from Santa Cruz Harbor. And then on Monday, I'm going to start a series on 21-day no complaint experiment. So it's an experiment that I give to my students as an extra credit every single semester. The goal is to go 21 straight days without a single complaint about anything. It's extremely challenging. I've attempted it numerous times. I've gone as long as 9 months. First time I tried this really seriously, I went 9 months and I never made it past 8 or 9 days in a row without complaining. What I'm going to do is explain the whole experiment to you, talk about why people complain, and then what you can get out of this experiment. And if you want to join me, I'll be sending these bracelets out to anybody who would like one. Okay, so if you've enjoyed this, please swipe from left to right on an iPhone, straight up on an Android. Hit follow so you can be informed of when I'm doing my next scope, which will be tomorrow. And if you like this and think people would find it useful, please share with your followers. Nice. I'm going to try the 21-day no complaint. Yes. And if you want to get a little preview, just type in 21-day no complaint experiment and you'll find my blog post. It's like the top 3 or 4 on Google. And just quickly put something on your wrist. Every time you complain, you switch wrists. The goal is to go 21 solid days without switching wrists. It's challenging. People complain a lot, and it's really enlightening to get aware of how often other people complain and how often you complain. Okay, longer post than I expected, but thank you so much for joining. My name is Joe, and I will be here every day for the next year. So thank you for the hearts. Before I sign off, are there any quick questions I can answer about anything I went through? Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you for joining the post or joining my scope today. Okay, so again, that was Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. If you're just tuning in, I have to actually sign off, so I'm not going to do another quick little recap, but you can watch the replay. All right, thank you so much. Have an awesome weekend, and my name is Joe. Hope to see you tomorrow.